Welcome to the Universal Dancer podcast with your host Leslie Zare, author of The Alchemy of Dance and the Alchemia Remedies. Coming to you from Cairo, Egypt, the ancient land of Chem. Journey with us to explore sacred dance, the sacred arts, the mystical and the magical. Join a community of like-minded souls seeking to understand the cosmic dance of co-creation through the sacred arts. Come along and expand your mind, ignite your creativity, and explore something new and something old. Welcome to the Universal Dancer podcast, and I'm Leslie Zare. I'm your host. So I have another interesting guest for you today, so let's just jump right in. Mr. Embodiment, Mark Walsh, is the author of Embodiment, Working with the Body in Training and Coaching, and Embodied Meditation. He hosts the Embodiment podcast with more than 1 million downloads and led the Embodiment Conference with 1,000 teachers and 500,000 delegates. He founded the Embodied Facilitators Course and has trained over 2,000 embodiment coaches in over 40 countries. He went to Ukraine twice during the recent conflict and set up saneukraine.org, a charity now run solely by Ukrainian professionals to provide trauma and embodiment training to trainers, therapists, and coaches. He gained an honors in psychology and has taught widely in the corporate world. He's worked in war zones and entertained over 50,000 children. He's headlined International Coach Federation events, taught at Moscow State University, lived with the circus in Ethiopia, taught celebrities, and kissed a princess. Mark is an Aikido black belt with 25 years of experience in other martial arts, yoga, bodywork, improv comedy, conscious dance, and meditation. Let's welcome Mark to the show. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Leslie. It's so weird listening to all the things I've been up to in my life. I don't really think of it in one place. I guess someone sent you that, and I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah, so, I've been busy. Yeah. It's good. It's good to hear it every once in a while. So let's just jump right in and tell us a little bit about how you or where you first started with embodiment work. I think you've done conscious dance, but that's not your main thing. I think you started with martial arts. So tell us how you got involved with all of that to begin with.
Yeah, I was kind of a mess as a kid and as a teenager. Like, I was really bright academically. I'd read all the books in the library, literally all the books in the sort of high school library. And I was drug addicted and alcoholic and brokenhearted and suicidal. And I kind of said to myself, well, I'm supposed to be really clever, because by Western academic standards, I was not anymore. But I said, if I'm so clever, like, why am I such a
you
mess?
Got over it.
Yeah, why do I hate myself? I totally did. It's like, why do I hate myself in my life if I've read all these books? Like, the answer's not in the. I was told the answer, my parents were teachers, and it's like, the answer should be in books, but it wasn't. So by the time I went to university to study psychology, I'd actually completely lost interest in academia. I didn't even go into the library at university. But where I did go into was the Aikido dojo. For various reasons, I wanted to study a martial art, and there's sort of practical reasons for it. But one reason I think was I had a sort of soul calling to embodiment, what I'd now call embodiment. And I remember going into an Aikido dojo at the university, like week one, they call it Freshers Week, right? Everyone else is getting drunk. And I went in there and I went, I need this. And I saw the movement and the discipline and the power and the beauty. And I just went, it's very dance-like Aikido. And I fell in love with it. And, Aikido really saved my life. And Aikido opened up into other things, right? Because it's got a meditative aspect. So at a certain point, I started sitting and meditating. And also that I love doing Aikido with free movement. I got very creative in my Aikido. And then sort of at some point, someone said, hey, your Aikido is very dance-like. You should dance. And I was like, no way, not me, mate. I don't dance. I'm British working class. I don't dance. What are you talking about? I'm not dancing. And then eventually I realized I just like moving, as I sort of freed up from the martial arts and studied partner dance and conscious dance. And conscious dance. I generally do about once a week. It's been a part of my life for about 25 years. So it's probably not my thing I do most, but it's definitely part of my embodiment. I'm going tonight dancing to a conscious dance. I did last Saturday. So it's pretty much part of my practice, part of my life now. I probably do it more than martial arts these days.
Yes, I think we know when we find that thing that is really pulling us. It's like it shines, it's glowing or something, and you know that that's where you need to go. So I get that when you encountered Aikido, you knew you were in the right place, and that's important. It's important to follow that.
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean,
think,
after you.
go ahead. No.
So for me, it's like finding life purpose or falling in love. You just know, right? This
Yes.
is the one. Or she's the one, he's the one, whatever. Or a place that feels really at home. You go to a city and you go, I want to live here. For me, that was a place though it's very challenging to me. I wasn't very good at Aikido at first. Certainly, it was very difficult for me. But I stuck with it. I think 100 people started in Freshers Week. And by the end of the semester, there's only 2 of us left, me and a friend.
Wow.
And so but I stuck with it, even though I wasn't very good. And there's that like bloody-minded determination, but also something like feeling called to something, like our own healing does call to us. And I knew that's what I needed, that discipline. I was alcoholic at the time, right? So for me, I know I needed some discipline in my life. I needed father figures, and I saw all these, guys teaching, and later on I had great female teachers too. But that was what I was longing for at first: was male role models, discipline, a way to be powerful without being abusive. And Aikido embodies that very literally. And then there was a certain point after, I was a live-in Aikido student after university. I spent 3 years living in dojos, which is really unusual in the West, in different countries. And but there was a certain point where the kind of returns were kind of diminishing. And this happens to all embodiment students after a while. Like, what you need now probably isn't what you needed 10 years ago. And there's a courage in sort of letting go of that. And, in my case, going to dance tango, dance the 5 rhythms, going to do some yoga, going to do meditation, like trying other things. And I kind of made it my life's work to survey what is possible in a conscious body, conscious awareness world. So usually people say, hey, what is embodiment? And you can think of it as the umbrella term for all the conscious movement arts. So conscious dance is definitely a part of that, but also martial arts, yoga, meditation, body therapy, body work, improv. They're kind of the areas. So all the areas that see the body as a part of who we are.
And I think what you said is really important about that feeling of falling in love, because that's that attraction thing. I think that lets us know when we're on path, is when we have that feeling like that I'm in love, or I'm in the right place, or however it comes. But I think that's important, and people are always wondering what they should do with their lives. And I think that's the way to know, like, follow your passion and see where it takes you, and what comes of that, really.
Yeah, I've coached a lot of people on life purpose, and the sort of follow your bliss is really helpful. That, like, well, what brings you alive? It's not necessarily what makes you happy, because it can also be what breaks your heart. In my
Yes.
case, I just noticed though I kept turning up to Aikido, even though my life was chaos and I had a lot of problems. I was every Tuesday, Thursday, I was there at the club, and I still know the times because they were just like, in my, like, that's what I was doing, 8 till 10 on the Tuesday and Thursday, while at university, and then later on more. Yeah, so it's like, what do you keep doing no matter what? And it's pretty unreasonable, like staying up all night dancing 5 rhythms, or going to karate every day, or getting up early to meditate even though you got kids. Like, it's pretty unreasonable what we do. There is a sense of, it has to be driven by love.
Certain insanity.
Yeah, you've got to be a little bit crazy, because otherwise it's like we'll just watch TV like everybody else, right?
But I think also, as you pointed out with the Aikido, that there are positive ways to do things. Like, if you have that energy to strike out, well, martial arts is a really good thing to do with that. So I think these impulses, there's nothing wrong with these impulses. It's about channeling them into something that, productive isn't the right word, but something that helps you to grow. And I think all of those, again, that's another important thing to do, is to kind of assess what are those things that pull me. And if they are even some, if you would describe it as violence or something, it doesn't need to be violence against someone. Maybe it is just that active, like punching. Maybe that's what needs to come out of you. So I think there are healthy ways to channel all of these impulses if you can just try different things or follow whatever it is that's pulling you. And
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
you said, maybe you're not good at it, but it doesn't really matter. It's the energy that you're putting into it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fighter at heart. If I'd have been born, and one of my teachers said, look, if you'd have been born 1,000 years ago, they would have just given you a sword and said, get on with it.
Exactly.
And, that's an instinct. That is an
Yes.
instinct. We are predatory animals, like that. And some of us more than others. Like, that is an instinct we have. And it might as well be channeled. The Japanese know this. Like, all Japanese school kids do Budo. So Budo martial arts isn't learning to fight. Like, Japan's a very safe place. You don't need to learn. You don't need to fight in Japan. Unless you're in the riot police or something. But it's character training, and I think we massively lack this in the West. So sports used to be this. Most Western sports were invented as character development, usually in the sort of British public school system. Now they're not really seen that way. Though you'll see this reinvented, like extreme sports and climbing. They're kind of reinventing the idea, character development, pushing your edge. Doing things that build qualities as a person. And this is the difference between embodied art and simply like a sport or an activity, right? Which is great. You can go to the gym, you can exercise, but what are you trying to develop as a trait? And sometimes this is conscious dance is more state orientated, which is good. Like, I go to conscious dance, I relax, I let go of my problems, I immerse myself in a process, I come out the other side of that with an altered state, and usually much more creative. I've got great new ideas for work, to resolve conflicts, and there's a state shift on the dance floor. Music is a drug, right? And there's other ways, like I do breath work for that too, or fasting. There's other ways to get state shifts. And then I'm also very interested in trait shifts. How do we develop ourselves as people over time? And where people have to be a bit cautious there is we tend to pick the embodied practice that suits our neurosis, right? So are we getting into conscious dance because we need to be, I know I've got students who need to be more expressive and be a bit wild and a bit free. I'm like, go to conscious dance. This is going to be great for you. And they're stiff and they find it difficult, but then they get into it and they develop that side of themselves. But then I've got other students who are all about being crazy, wild and free, and they do nothing but crazy, wild and free dance. And it's actually the last thing they need. They should probably go to martial arts. So, who needs what at what point in their life is a really interesting question. I've found one size definitely doesn't fit all. And, you've had lots of great guests on, so I'm sure you've seen all the different ways of doing things that are out there.
But also, going back to what you said about being a warrior, and in Japan, they pursue this, but as a training. I feel that in Western culture, not only have we become disembodied, but everything has to be so safe. It's
Yeah.
like we're wrapping everybody in cotton wool, and you can't experience anything. I mean, like with children, when you're raising children, it's frightening because they're going to do anything. They're daredevils. And it is frightening. But I think you have to only stop them if you really think that they're going to get hurt badly, because it's when they touch the stove and they get burned that they learn. Yes, if they're going to have third-degree burns,
Sure.
that's not a good
Sure.
idea, but nobody's experiencing anymore. And I think that this whole disembodiment has really been a progression, and it makes you wonder if that isn't like where we're going as far as into this kind of new age where we're going to turn into robots or something. I mean, maybe they're preparing us to not know
Transhumance.
how to be in our,
Yeah.
not to know how to be in our bodies anymore, or not to want to be, or to think it's not a good thing. And I think the reaction to that is this embodiment movement where people are realizing, no, hang on a minute, that's a very unhealthy place to be. And I think this over safety thing is also unhealthy. There, okay, there needs to be
Yeah.
a balance, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the problem with I can say the Western world, to a slightly less extent where you are, but you can talk about Asia as well. But I'll just say the West for simplicity, is that it's too soft and too easy, so people get weak, and people then have an expectation of safety, which is a problem for several reasons. One, it's impossible. You could die of a brain aneurysm now. Like, death is just there hanging
Yes.
over you. Two, bad things happen, whether it be abuse, accidental things like car accidents, like the war in Ukraine. Like, this things in life you need to be tough for. You need to build strength, and the way to build strength is not to protect people from difficulty. It's to deliberately expose oneself to difficulty in a, as you say, not in a traumatic way, but in a calibrated, choiceful, consensual, graded way. And that's what that's what cold showers do. I weightlift. Weightlifting is that I go somewhere 3 times a week and do something very difficult. And if it's not difficult, it's not working. But the practice of weightlifting for me isn't about muscles, other than moving the furniture. What do I need biceps for, right? It's the practice of doing something hard regularly. Because if you don't, you get weaker and weaker and weaker. And then when it comes to your father's funeral, or your wife's cancer, or your children going through drug addiction, you are not able to handle it. So as well as doing things that are pleasant and easy and fun, which, I have a sauna every week too, right? Like, I'm a big fan of massage. I'm a big fan of pleasurable. I'm Italian, I'm
Oh,
like
good for you.
Italian
Yeah.
nature. So it's like, I'm a big fan of that too. We need to go with the body. We need to enjoy ourselves. We need to say yes to the body, but we also need to do things that are difficult. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is an agenda to say the world should be totally safe. Like, that's what happened during the Chinese plague. Is people said, hey, everything should be totally safe. It's impossible. Like, total
Yes.
safety means we're all prisoners, right? That's what total safety requires, is you being in a cage. That's the safest place you can be, is locked up at home. That's not the best place.
In a padded room.
In a padded room in a straitjacket. That is the safest place for everyone. Or
then you're safe.
Computer, not touching anyone, not going out. In a way, it's not, because health comes from co-regulation and interaction and touch and other people as well. But there's a case that's made there, and that idea that life should be safe, that's not the ultimate value in life. No. Like my mum said, go skateboarding, go out in the woods, go with your friends all day, come back for dinner. Here's a sandwich. Go run around the fields. Like I want you to eat some dirt. I want you to fall over and twist your ankle. Like, as far as I'm concerned, if you're raising kids and they don't break a bone, that's child abuse. Like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like this is how we learn. And
exactly.
Make safety the ultimate virtue is to make us all prisoners. Plus, there's this agenda of the body is bad and we should somehow transcend the body and all be uploaded into a cloud. That's a sort of tech piece on top of that.
No, and it's unrealistic. There's no way that somebody can be safe. And I think we, as you mentioned earlier, we need resilience. And the only way to build resilience is to challenge yourself. And maybe you can do that in a controlled way or not, but we are not adaptable if we're so worried about everything that anything coming at us, because we won't know how to deal with it. So
you won't handle it. And I say in my workshops, I say this isn't a safe space. I say this is an ethical space. It's a respectful place. There'll be consent in here. But I say this isn't a safe space. You can get up, because what the younger generation often mean in the West by safe, they don't mean physically safe. They mean that they won't be emotionally upset, right?
Yes.
That's not possible. You can't learn without challenge. So, I say to them, no, this in the sense of safe, as in that you'll always have positive emotions. And what it leads to is just very controlling people. Because if you can't manage yourself, you have to manage the world. I have to stop
Yes.
what you say. I have to stop what you do, right? Because that's the only way they can try desperately to do the impossible, to establish some sense of security.
And the most controlling people are fearful people because, like you said, they have to manage their external world. No, in Egypt, like anything goes. And when I go back to the US, I remember my family are all theater people. So used to go to the theater a lot, lived close to New York City. And then my sister was telling me that now in the theaters, they have to give you these trigger warnings before you go into the theater. So I don't know if they make an announcement. I haven't been to the theater since this happened. They make an announcement or it's in the program that there's going to be suicide like they do in movies or shows now. There's, that there may be a lot of blood or there may whatever. And
Sure.
I thought, but this is the part of the creative process is to make you feel something.
Yeah, and I'm
And
not, yeah. Go on.
and and yes, a person could be triggered, but isn't it about being triggered and then finding support or working through whatever it is, as opposed to never going into any or being afraid to go to the theater, being afraid to go to watch a movie because you're worried that you're going to be triggered. I think we need to have coping mechanisms rather than removing anything that could possibly disturb anybody.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm hashtag triggered, right? So, I mean, I've studied trauma. My mentor worked with abuse survivors who have real trauma. I've worked in multiple war zones, including fairly recently. And what people, I did a post on Facebook yesterday called "Californian versus Ukraine Trauma," and first world trauma versus first world war trauma, and there's a big difference. And in a way, it's great that the world, I've studied trauma for 20 years, right? And it's great in that time that the world has become more trauma aware. That's a really good thing. People like Bessel van der Kolk, Pete Levine, Gabor Mate, they've done a great service to the world by making this stuff popular. Seeing Prince Harry do a thing with Gabor Mate the other day, hearing Joe Rogan talk about trauma and embodiment, it's like, wow, this stuff's catching on, which 20 years ago
It's
I wouldn't have
everywhere.
expected. And there's a
Yes.
little bit of overshoot as the bar to trauma, inverted commas, is lowered. Now, there's sense in that because trauma is subjective to an extent, and there is a way in which it's you can't. How do you say what overwhelms someone? So their resources, cultural subjectivity. Lowering the bar of what is trauma has been a good thing because it enables us to talk about daily things. But when I'm talking to I was talking to the team that I supervise in Ukraine 2 days ago about, gang rapes and torture and things like that. It just puts into perspective people saying they're triggered, which is a term I reserve to refer to a reenactment of actual trauma. And then there might be, genuine trigger warnings about things like rape might be quite useful on a film, actually. However, I think that culture could be taken way too far, way too far. And certainly, my days are bizarre because of the online context. I'll be talking to Ukraine 1 minute and literally California 30 minutes later. And people have got a real different sense of
Surreal.
trauma.
Yes.
It's a little bit surreal. So I think the whole field's going to have to be rewritten to accommodate the sort of upper and lower limits of what's now called trauma. Sometimes it's big
Well,
T called.
and hopefully, as these things are kind of brought more into common awareness or whatever you want to call it, that also the resources will. So if people start to realize that they have triggers or perhaps they studied trauma, that they will pursue something like even just reading a book about trauma or watching a film about it or something, so that if these are kind of, I don't want to say minor, but less major than living in a war zone, that they will do something about it, that they will find those resources, especially if you're in a Western country that's affluent and probably these resources are available to you. Hopefully people will go out and find them.
Yeah, it's great that there's less stigma. I mean, you know, I was speaking to some movement teachers and certainly any conscious dance teachers listening to this, like, just go on YouTube for a few hours. You know, you can find great lectures by all the big names I just mentioned, you know, and then there's local ones. Like we're talking about Yasmin, who's local there in Egypt. And, you know, there's people I know talking about Slavic. The American kind of centric model is very culturally myopic. So often it needs adapting. You know, when there's things like I've got American teachers that taught me things that I'd be eaten alive if I tried them in Ukraine. And the same even in England. You know, Israel is different again. There's a lot of great Jewish teachers who do trauma work. Irish is my own background, less of that narrative. African American, there's some good teachers coming out of that perspective. I haven't seen much coming out of India or Japan. But it's like the cultural piece is really important to fully acknowledge and take into account. And we are seeing a slightly biased perspective because it pretty much all comes from the West Coast of sort of Canada and America currently. And the adaptations are interesting. But yeah, it's great. There's less stigma. That strikes me as super positive.
Yes, and resources. It is all out there. Like you said, it's on YouTube. Listen to somebody and
There's no excuse for
start
not.
the process.
If you're a teacher who works with the body is absolutely. I spoke to some Feldenkrais teachers who hadn't heard of Pete Levine. I was like, where have you been for the last 20 years? Under a rock? It's like you don't have to spend money on a course. Just listen to a few good podcasts. You don't have to become like a trauma expert or a therapist. Like is, right? You don't have to be as expert as she is or some of my colleagues. You know, you just have to, like I'm an educator. I'm not a therapist. I just tell people about trauma, and that's huge because once people know what the symptoms are, they can be encouraged to get help. They know they're not going crazy. It normalizes it. It takes away the shame. Like that. Just even just like a few hours of trauma information is huge. And actually, this is where the war in Ukraine, someone pointed out to me yesterday, is unique. I spoke to someone who's an ex-British serviceman, and they said, wow, it's great. The team out there are training a lot of soldiers currently. And normally there's a war, and then 20 years of denial, pain, alcoholism, and violence later, they look at trauma. Whereas Ukraine, first time in history, during a war, they're looking at trauma. And this is actually, I get tingles saying it, like the charity that I support, you know, the mission of Sane Ukraine is to make Ukraine the most trauma aware country in the world. And that's obviously it shouldn't have to be, right? An ideal world would be no fucking war. Yeah. But the second place ideal world is people are learning about trauma. And that is happening on a large scale in Ukraine. And that's the first time in human history that's happened during a war and not when the guys come home, beat their wives, the kids have issues, you know, drug addiction, not like after Vietnam, not, you know, because there's this weird amnesia that happens after every major conflict with trauma, where society sort of forgets about it and then it gets rediscovered and it goes from shell shock to combat fatigue to PTSD. The possible exception of Israel, who's really good on the trauma front. This is the first time I've really seen it like during a war. The other thing is the intensity of this war is unique in living memory. So there hasn't been a war as intense as this for Western nations, and I'd class Ukraine as one, since World War One. So just a fun fact for you, no two countries with McDonald's have ever been to war until Russia started invading its neighbors. Because up to what we've had is what's called the Great Peace. So with the exception of the Yugoslav conflict in Europe, North America, there's been an exceptionally long period of peace, which is why we're all soft. Okay. But it's also, we've in that time forgotten what really violent, ugly war like American Civil War, World War One looks like. So what you've got is a lot of trauma, but you've also got a lot of cool psychologists. You've got, you know, we're sending soldiers TikTok videos about trauma. You know, they're on the front lines looking at their TikTok, you know, much maligned platform, and I think for good reasons, but that's what they use. So for us, it's, you know, it's possible.
So tell us more about your journey to the Ukraine. What this organization, how did you come to start doing this and then develop this organization?
You've got to have a hobby, right?
What a hobby. Wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been involved with Ukraine for 10 years. I first trained coaches there about 10 years ago. Then the Russians invaded the eastern region. It's kind of pseudo civil war, but it was really a low-level Russian invasion in Donbass region. And then my colleagues asked me to teach some trauma work, because at the time there was very few trauma psychologists in Ukraine. There was, low-level war that's been going on for the last 8 years since Maidan, which I was also involved with. That was interesting, another story. But there's a big protest that kicked off there. So anyway, they said, can you come to this trauma training to help us out? I said, well, there's not really much money in it, but okay, I'll do it as a favor. And all my interpreters were beautiful single young women. Turned out this was a setup, and I ended up marrying one of them. And that way I kept coming back, and they got free training. So everybody wins. My wife didn't know about this, to be fair. So this was just sort of how it landed.
We won't tell her.
She was like, why do you need 6 interpreters? So this is, anyway, so because of my wife, I had lots of contacts there. So when the invasion happened this time, I felt very strongly about it. And my first instinct was to go fight, because that's my nature. And then my friend Alex and another friend said, Mark, why don't you go teach trauma? That way you won't get shot, and you're actually good at teaching trauma. And I went, oh, yeah. So I went out there with my friend Polish Pete. We delivered a load of medical supplies to a children's hospital that was in dire need. So we basically did international drug dealing with about 75K of medical supplies. So that was fun, drug running across borders. And then I trained a whole bunch of young psychologists, about 100 in the first instance, to do trauma education. I spoke to the local psychologists, and they said, look, we're overwhelmed, as therapists, but what would be really helpful is if you train people to teach people about trauma. So there's something called trauma first aid that we train them in, which you don't have to be a therapist to do, which is quite quick to train, and something trauma education, which again is not therapeutic but educational. So we train them in that, and I did 2 trips doing that. And since then, eventually they set up a Ukrainian charity. I gave all the control over to some young Ukrainian women who wanted to run it as a charity. And now I'm a supervisor for them. And I think time of recording, they've trained probably about 16,000 people. They trained like all the teachers and nurses in Lviv, for example, which is a major city. And they're now training doctors, kids, the military, all kinds of people. So there's a quick version.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, maybe this should become part of our educational system. I mean, maybe from the very beginning in schools, we should be taught. That could be a useful thing to be taught in school.
Yeah, I mean, Lviv now has the most trauma-aware education system. Literally every teacher of all age groups in the city has been trained. Because what's happening is they had a lot of refugee kids with different trauma issues. They didn't understand what was going on. Every doctor and nurse in the city has been trained. This is a major city. And so now it's the most trauma-aware healthcare system in any city in the world, right? Wow. So, but this should be standard everywhere. Like, I'm shocked that doctors don't know about trauma. So much ill health is related to trauma. I go to the doctor and I'm shocked they don't know what trauma is. It's like, come on. One of my progressive MD friends sent me the Gabor Mate documentary not long ago, and I was like, okay, great, well done for catching up. I've been doing this for 20 years, but it's nice, nice doctors have got legitimacy somehow because he's a doctor.
Exactly. Yes.
It should be like teachers should know about this. So when little Johnny's acting out and can't concentrate, or little Susie's withdrawn and introvert, they understand these things could be trauma related.
Yes. No, absolutely. And if we did that, and we started at that point with the children while they're children, rather than waiting until they're adults and reliving all of this in different ways, we could perhaps nip it in the bud and
be nice, wouldn't it?
Not and not have to live with it all our lives, so that it's really ingrained
in the Bible, it
in our
says
psyche.
The sins of the father will be visited unto the son for 5 generations. And I think all the Bibles in the world, this is in the Old Testament, so for the Jews too, should just cross that out and go, unless you get some really good trauma therapy, then you can sort it in 1 generation. It's like that 5 generations of suffering bullshit it's not necessary anymore.
No, and maybe it was then, but I think, I think that is our the new age. I don't want to keep using that phrase, but I mean it as a new age, like that we as aware people will be moving into, is that we have the ability to heal what happened to our ancestors, because we are aware, first of all, that it is a possibility. I think generations before didn't think, and maybe, as you said, you're quoting from the Bible. If they're reading something like this, then maybe it's really ingrained in the psyche that this isn't going to happen. I'm not going to be able to do this. But I think people now are aware that they can heal their own trauma or physical issues, and they can heal it back through time, through the generations. So
Yeah, the intergenerational
um
stuff too. Yeah, I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity we have, and as long as we don't get too weak or too decadent or too uploaded to the cloud sort of technological, I think there is a unique opportunity. Trauma is in the Iliad. Trauma's been around forever, and it's like some tribal
sure.
peoples had rituals and way of dealing with it, and there may have been advantages when people were more active and more co-regulated in social groups. But these Western technological additions, and they are the psychotechnologies of trauma therapies are really great additions to the human race, in the same way as mindfulness from the East is a really great addition to. Everyone should know this. Like, it's, for me, it's like mindfulness is just like a boon for humanity in the same way as trauma therapy is. So the bringing together of this psychotechnology is really fantastic, and it does give me hope. And I feel like we live in a world of just luxury. We have an app, right? Just quick plug for the app, but there's a reason for it. We've called the Embodiment app. You can go on there, and it's free, and you can look at hundreds of Zoom classes of everything. So I'm just opening it now, and there's movement for pregnancy, beginners chair yoga, Pilates, somatic movement class, setting healthy boundaries, biodancers, deep relaxation. That's just literally the top classes that are on today. And like, you can go on your phone and get onto an online class, maybe taught from Washington or Portugal or anywhere. So yeah, I mean, this was very different. When I started studying embodiment, there was no 5 rhythms class in Leeds. I lived in a sort of northern industrial town, a bit like Detroit or something, right? There was a little bit of yoga. I was lucky there was an Aikido dojo. I was lucky there wasn't one in the nearest town. So it's like, now we're just living in this ridiculous abundance of this stuff, to the point where it's almost like a supermarket and people take it for granted, maybe.
Yes, it is. There has to be a balance also between what's available and it becoming possibly too commercial. We need quality in what we're doing as well. So, but yes, the availability of it is astronomical. I know when I left the U.S. in 1986, I think there was nothing. There was no, I don't think we even, I mean, unless you were in a major city, I don't think there was
Yeah.
even yoga
Outside of the
classes
Bay
then.
Area, you'd struggle to find much, right? Like a
Yeah.
couple of little hubs, maybe central New York or San
So
Francisco.
yes,
Yeah.
things have changed, and we need to take advantage of that. Let's use it. We have the tools, so we can use them.
Yeah,
I
I've
want to
after you.
go ahead.
No, go on.
I want to refer to a quote from your book because I think this is interesting. Again, talking about society, we numb to pain, but in doing so, numb to pleasure too, and also to our internal ethical compass. We forget ourselves to forget the world, and in doing so, turn off that which would drive us to make it better. I think that's so interesting. That was quite profound for me because I have done some trauma work, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that yes, we're shutting down from all the pain, but we're shutting down to the pleasure too. That explained a lot to me about
Okay, so
myself.
the
So that was
personal
very
bit there, yeah.
illuminating. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't selectively numb. You can disembody, and people do it unconsciously, through trauma, through overwhelm, through overstimulation, various things, right? Just the modern world, the speed of it. And it's not their fault, right? They're just trying to cope. But once you numb your ability to feel pleasure as well as pain. So it's a common trauma thing, but again, just general disembodiment. But also we're numbing our compass, like you talked about earlier, the sort of the compass of purpose, of like practice, like, hey, being in love with something. You're numbing the ethical compass. it's like all the Russians doing atrocious things right now in Ukraine. They're coming from a traumatized culture, and this is not an excuse. This is not a moral get out of jail free card. These people should be put in jail. And traumatized cultures do violence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, traumatized cultures do violence. So there's a vicious circle of trauma and violence. And when we're cut off from ourselves, we're cut off from that quiet voice inside that people used to call a conscience before it became out of fashion.
Well, and I think that the work that you're doing in Ukraine speaks to that, because this is what you want is you want to be able to work with people that are being traumatized, so that then they don't go on and traumatize someone else, whether that be their children or them then invading another country. But yeah, if the healing can happen, like while the wound is being inflicted, then hopefully it doesn't perpetuate on into the victim becoming the aggressor kind of thing.
Yeah, and that definitely happens. I've seen that in the Middle East. That can definitely happen. Victims can become aggressors. There's a sort of drama triangle, and a sort of trauma numbing that could lead to, my family are from Ireland, right? Like I've done peace work in Northern Ireland as well. And, that cycle was actually broken. Now, Northern Ireland's not perfect today, but, I grew up in the 80s with the IRA blowing things up. I have family in the British Army, and I have family back in my history who were, shall we say, quite Republican. And probably enough to say that. And that violence stopped. People had enough. People started doing grassroots peace projects and youth projects and now trauma work. Like people in Northern Ireland went, fuck this, right? Like, so it is possible to stop it. Northern Ireland's, go to Belfast now, it's a great city. Someone said beautiful glass buildings. We didn't dare build these 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
No.
So it's a great city, fun, friendly, great party town, good vibe, lovely people. So yeah, Belfast, friendliest town in Great Britain. Yeah. So there is possibilities of breaking those cycles when people have had enough.
Well, and hopefully that, this will give them then the skills also to be able to heal and do it in a very positive way. I want to ask you a question that seems kind of obvious, but there's a point here. Why is embodiment so important? So we've kind of talked
Sure.
around this issue, giving examples and all of that, but what happens? Like, what really happens to us or doesn't happen to us when we're disembodied?
Okay, so let's quick answer. Why is embodiment important? Your own personal happiness and the ongoing survival of the human race. There we go. Just as a quickie. So let's go through I, we, and it. So on an I perspective, individuation. So you go through your own life purpose, your own blossoming, your own who are you? That can only happen through embodiment. Like, what do I want? We're talking about that with radar. Yeah, also health. If you're not embodied, you're going to be unhealthy. But it's kind of not my main area, but not listening to the signals of your body will end badly health-wise, whether that be addictions or not listening to their various health problems. So we've got the I, the we. Relationally, if you're not embodied, you cannot have intimate, pleasurable, connected, meaningful relationships. We have to connect to ourselves to connect to others. And that is, again, how society works, how happiness works. Happiness is very dependent on our relationships. And simply, whatever you do, you'll be more effective in. So I don't know anyone who's become less effective in their job, whatever that is. And I've trained almost I've worked with lawyers, doctors, soldiers, nurses, chefs, you name it. I've worked with them over the years. Like for a few years, I was kind of like trying to prove a point. So any group I hadn't worked with, I'd work with for free. I'd be like, okay, you angry chefs, great, let's do it, Gordon Ramsay. Street kids, great, let's go.
Because you want your food to be good.
Yeah, angry chefs are fun. They are like Gordon Ramsay. So angry. So you get more effective. Sometimes people go for a stage where they get a bit sensitive. Sometimes people do conscious dance, go for a stage where they're a bit too expressive and then need to learn a bit better self-regulation. I've seen that happen, but that just means that they've got one skill but not another. So I break embodiment down into a set of embodied intelligence in my books and YouTube and all the rest of it. So the embodied intelligence is a really nice concrete model. Corporate world likes it because I go, these are skills you can get better at. And any one of them will enhance your life, whether it be self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, or impact and influence to take the main four. Is that okay answer?
I think
Not the easiest
that's
question.
yes, I think you covered just about everything there. But what I found is that I think a lot of people don't even realize that they're not embodied, that maybe they don't know what that feels like. So, I mean, I think that's where obviously these different practices, but that was the first interesting thing to me was that there are so many people that don't even realize that they're not embodied, that they
Yeah.
have to first be shown what it means to be embodied because they've never had that experience, or they've had it but they didn't know what it was or how to relate to it.
Yeah, so like some basic frameworks really help, accessible language, whether it be embodied intelligence or accessible trauma language, whatever. It's like, I'm not angry. You can't feel that you're not feeling, right? You can't feel that you're not
Yes.
feeling. So what people do see though is the impact. It's like, why yoga teacher shiny? Why? Let's take my PA Zeba, 50 years old, looks 30, has loads of energy, absolutely beautiful from an inside out, not physical kind of way. Great mother, great colleague, pleasant to be around. Everyone notices those things. Why is she such a great mom? Why is she such a nice colleague? Why is she so hot? I don't think she'd mind me saying that. I'm not harassing her if she's out there. She's a happily married woman. So those are the things people notice. And they say, hey, Zeba. Okay, hey, Zeba, that's her name. Why, how come you're like this? And I'm like, how come I'm like this? Well, that's Zeba says, I do yoga, I do meditation. Okay, so I think we might not always do it, but we see it. The other thing is people feel it. Like I've done meditation with like police and military, and they go, oh, that feels better. Yeah, you do it right. You give it in a language they can find accessible. You take someone conscious dancing. It's like, how does it feel? They're like, it feels great. Like the evidence is there. You just
Yes.
get people through the door.
Exactly. And it's very experiential. Once you've had the experience and then oh, this is what embodiment feels like, then I think you can relate to it. But for those people who haven't, again, they may have had the experience but not even realized that they were having it or how to pursue it, really. So, yes.
Yeah, and little by little, it's catching on. Good stuff catches on, people kind of look and go, wow, you look healthy, or wow, you seem much calmer than most people, or, like my students in Ukraine going, why are you not panicking when the rockets start flying? And I'm like, because I have training. I have 20 years of it also is not my first rodeo, right? But it's like the alarm goes off, everyone panics. I don't, I'm scared. Someone's trying to kill us. But I say, like, guys, take a breath. We've got 3 minutes to get to the bomb shelter. We're in known danger for 3 minutes. Take a breath. Let's walk there. Let's not rush because people get hurt when you rush. And then they go, what's he doing? I want some of that.
Well, yeah, leading by example. Absolutely. Physician, heal thyself. And then
Yeah,
be
I
an
don't always get it
example to
right
everybody
either.
else.
It's war
Yes.
zones are easy. It's family dinners that are hard, to steal a phrase from someone.
Because that's deeper.
That's the real shit. War zones. What? It's the holiday for my business.
Yes.
Right. Dealing with my business, my family,
Yeah.
Christmas dinners. That's the difficult stuff.
No. And it's very interesting to see people and what they can tolerate and what they can't. I'm somebody that suffers from anxiety, and there are certain things that I'm not sure a war zone, but there's a lot of things I do doesn't bother me at all. Yeah, I can easily get, and people are saying, "How can you do that?" Then there's other things that are going to bring me to my knees because again, they're probably related to something much deeper, but it's not even. And I think again, resilience, I guess, the more you can relate what doesn't bother you to those situations when you're in anxiety and try to use whatever those skills are that you have.
Right, and you put your finger on it that it's skills. So if you have a practice that's just a state practice, like you do the breath work or you go dancing, you get high. I'm gonna go dancing tonight. I know it's gonna feel good. Okay. But if I'm not building skills, how do I take that into the rest of my life? I've been a big fan of getting yoga off the mat or getting, dance off the dance floor, Aikido off the mat. I did my dissertation on that. So it's this for me is the key thing, because it's like otherwise, if yes, you feel great twice a week at yoga or dance or whatever, that's great. But what about the other? I don't do the maths. However many hundreds of hours that is in a week, the other what is 150 hours, whatever. It's like there's a lot of time when we're not on the dance floor feeling good in some sort of escapism holiday.
Or even relating. I know for me, if I have anxiety and I just start doing the breathing, like immediately I ground. But it's getting myself to remember to do the breathing, because when you're in this
Right.
anxious state, obviously you're all over the place, and that isn't the first thing that. So I do think, like you said, it's a skill, it's a practice. The more often I have anxiety, remember to do the breathing, then hopefully the next time I have anxiety, I also remember to do the breathing.
Yeah, you need to train it, because under pressure, your brain becomes very
Exactly.
conservative. It goes back to what it knows. And, this is a bit counterintuitive, because in the West, we're taught you learn things once. Like I say, hey, what's the capital of Egypt? And you tell me it's Cairo. I go, great, I know that. I know it. I know it, we say, like as a verb. Okay, but to know a breath technique, I can't just teach you it once. You need to practice it. You need to embed it. You need to make it a habit. That's for me, when the air alarm went off, when the rocket started firing, my habit was to breathe, ground and center. My habit was to practice ABC centering, which is something I teach, right? Like that to me was just in my system at that point, but I've been doing it 20 years. So the average person is going to go out the window. So yeah, we have to train things and we have to pressure test them, which is where the doing difficult things, not just yummy nice things, comes in.
Well, let's jump to that. You have an embodied facilitators course. So who is that for, and what do you do in this training?
Okay, yeah. So that was just to be clear, I'm not selling anything, because we're not starting another one until next January. So we have an annual course. We actually call it CEC now, the Certificate of Embodiment Coaching. It took over from a live course, so now we have an online course, so people around the world can do it. And then we have live trainings to sort of get the in the flesh experience. And if they're in Australia, they might not make any. If they're in Europe, they might make a bunch. If they're in America, they might make one or two. And the online training spread out over time. We do that every year, training coaches to work with the body. So that's my day job, right? Not the Ukraine stuff. We do a sort of, a trauma coaching addition to it. We do a bit just sort of for civilians who don't want to be coaches. But the main thing I do is I train embodiment coaches. And I'm an absolute teaching geek. So I really enjoy, I'm third generation teacher. So training teachers, or coaches in this case, I love. Like that's what I love. That's on my main thing. So we do that. We have other online courses, something called Toolkit. We do little marketing courses, because most coaches are rubbish at that. We've got one, I think it starts tomorrow by the time this goes live, on embodied spirituality, exploring what that looks like together. I mean, basically, Embodiment Unlimited is the company, and we have a course every month or two, but the main coach training doesn't start till January or February.
And what are people learning? Are they learning different modalities, or this is something that you have created yourself, or what does this entail?
Yeah, so first of all, they get deeper into their own embodiment, right? Because that's the foundation. So we're really good at helping people get embodied in a few months, with a minimal time investment, which is not nothing, but it's not 10 hours a day, because my students haven't got, it's 5 hours a week, 5 or 6 hours a week, which is not nothing. It is a commitment, but we found like there's certain things we want them to do, and we've got very good at figuring out what gets people in their bodies. And if they haven't got time to do 2 hours conscious dance a night, which would be bloody lovely, but they can't always do that. So yeah, that's. Oh, sorry, the line cut out. Maybe this could be edited. We're live. Okay. So that's the first thing, getting people into their bodies. Second thing is practical coaching tools. So again, someone might do martial arts or yoga, or conscious dance. They'll be very in their own body, but how do you bring that to a businessman? How do you bring that to a busy single mum? So actually, it's a few concrete tools like centering, and we do something with the 4 elements. So people can see all this on YouTube if they're curious to just have a look for free or on the app. So we give concrete tools, but we also, as you kind of said, we give an overview of embodiment. So I'm kind of like the overview guy. I'm not the most embodied. I'm not the best coach. I'm definitely not the best dancer. I'm not the toughest martial artist, but I've sort of done a bit of everything. So I can say to one student, you should do Feldenkrais. And they're like, what's that? I'll tell them. And so I say to another student, hey, you might want to try doing 5 rhythms. If you can't find 5 rhythms, I really recommend movement medicine or open floor, and they'll say, what's that? I say, well, go check it out. Here's a teacher I recommend on the internet. So that kind of offerings, and we don't force them, right? But giving them a map and offering them practices from across this world of embodiment, I think we're pretty good at that.
And so people who are already facilitators could do this certification and then kind of add this as a layer on to what if they're teaching 5 rhythms or whatever they're already doing, they can add this on to deepen that practice.
100%. So we get people who are like, I want to be an embodiment coach. We get people who are already coaches and they want to add the body. So they're like, hey, I'm an executive coach, but what the hell is this? Blow my neck, And then we get a
I don't know how to use this.
Yeah, like what? I know this matters, but what do I do here? They're fun, they're great, and they're normally very dedicated, and it's cute. We send them to their first ever dance class, and they freak out and cry and have a breakthrough. It's great. And then the other group are like yoga teachers, dance teachers, martial arts teachers who know the body really well, but they either want a bigger framework because maybe they know Aikido really well, like I did, but they don't know the wider body world. Or they just want to layer it in, like they're already teaching movement medicine or something awesome like that, and they just want to layer it into what they're already doing, which is just totally fine with us. Like, I believe in principles and not gurus. It's
yes.
Me and Christina teach it. So she's German, very different vibe, different embodiment practice. So 2 very different teachers teaching it. And our attitude is like, you need to learn the principles of embodiment and apply it in your way, because my students are grown-ups, they're not babies who can be told what to do.
That sounds excellent. I'm going to check that out myself. So if people want to find out more, they can go to your website. Is that the best place to?
Or the app, depending on what they like. Both have got a load of free speakers from the embodiment conference we did, including a lot of the big trauma names I mentioned. There's podcasts there, there's videos of speakers, there's PDFs of things on coaching and trauma, yoga, conscious dance, obviously. So either the app or the website, and that will also let you know, like, we do free events about every month or 2. So if people want to taste, they can come to one of those.
And also getting on your mailing list, because you send a lot of emails about different things. So
and far too many people on our list, but probably squeeze a few more in. It's a bit ridiculous already.
So the website is embodimentunlimited.com, and I will have the links to all of these in the show notes. You're also on Facebook.
Not for the easily offended. Just want to say this is me on best behavior today. Facebook is anyone from Portland who's going to get upset. Don't go on my Facebook. Instagram is a bit cleaner. Instagram
you've been warned.
I have a Ukrainian refugee we gave a job to, and she makes sure I don't post anything too bad on Instagram. But if you're
being monitored,
the internet, all this stuff comes up: the books, the podcasts, the websites. Yeah. I don't even know anymore. It's like a whole ecosystem.
Yes, it is another world. Yes, and you're also on Instagram. Walsh.
Lots of nice little videos for people that like that.
Okay.
Mira's 25 and she's taught me how to do these little videos that people like. So I do like a few videos every week that are 1 minute long, which I find quite accessible because people can just, I find it a great way of tasting a teacher's work. So I'm glad young Mira taught me that.
It's always more to learn.
There is. Got to listen to the kids. They know stuff.
Yeah. And then we have YouTube at Embodiment Channel.
I think so. I think we've got 3 channels now, but if they put my name into YouTube, they'll find it.
Okay. So that's one of them. And podcast. So the podcast is where? If people want to find it, they can find it from the website or the app, or
We
where
are
does one
available
find
at
that?
is it iTunes, the Play Store, Tinder,
Okay.
Grindr, no, none of those places. So it's iTunes and the Play Store, the normal places you find podcasts.
Okay. And it's called the Embodiment Podcast. So you can look for it there. And also the organization that you started, saneukraine.org, for anyone who wants to know more about that.
If Elon Musk is listening, give them lots of money. Okay, if you're out there,
There we go.
It won't go to me. I don't get any of it, but there'll be some very appreciative.
Maybe we'll hashtag hashtag Elon Musk so he can watch this. Good. All right. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us today, and all the things that you've done, and all the places that we can go to learn more about embodiment. I think that's very helpful for everyone at this point in time.
Leslie, my pleasure, and I want to hear offline what it's like in Egypt and stuff there as well. You got me curious, so my pleasure.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you to all the listeners for being here. We have other episodes of the podcast. There's a playlist. So if you're interested to see other episodes, you can have a look at that. We also have a community on Facebook. Gave you the wrong link there. We do have a community on Facebook. And you can go to my website, universaldancer.com. And also, I teach a very basic foundation course as dance as a spiritual practice, and that's universaldancer.thinkific.com. So I think between my resources and Mark's resources, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to look at and to learn more. And I hope you will be curious, because this is an important topic. And as Mark said, there's a lot of resources out there. The app, I have downloaded the app and I've looked at it a bit, but I'm definitely going to spend more time there seeing what's on there. All right. Well, thank you for being here, and I hope we see you again next time. Bye-bye.